So good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully everybody's able to hear me well. I just want to welcome you to our webinar, Overcoming the 4 Biggest Challenges of Azure Cloud. I wanted to first acknowledge these kind of strange and unpredictable times we're in right now. We hope you're all staying healthy, your businesses are able to minimize the impact, and that you're all getting adjusted to working from home, while of course homeschooling your kids. Don't be surprised if sometime during this webinar there's some loud noises coming from my other room and my son wanders in here to get some paper out of my printer. So let me start by telling you the VIAcode is in the business of helping clients today to migrate to Azure, optimize Azure, and manage Azure. So we talk to a lot of clients, and therefore we understand the challenges our clients are facing. And sometimes we are facing these challenges on their behalf because we're their Azure Cloud Managed Service provider. So what's the objective today? We can't expect to cover everything you need to know to be able to optimize Azure in less than an hour, but we can begin to help you recognize what you do not know and help you to begin to shine a light on your Azure environment. Before we move on, I need to do a little housekeeping first. If you have any questions, check out the question tab on your webinar control panel. Feel free to enter questions in there. If we have time, we'll try to answer those questions during the webinar. If not, we'll be glad to get back to you and answer questions post-webinar. If you think of some other topics that might be of interest to you as we go through this, feel free to drop those into the chat section of the webinar control panel. There will be no bathroom breaks. So we suggest that you do not take your laptop with you when you do your bathroom breaks, especially if your video is on. That reminds me of an unfortunate video conference call incident that I once had, but I'll save that for another day. So what qualifies VIAcode to do this webinar? VIAcode started about 18 years ago building enterprise applications. And while doing so, we recognized at that time the challenges that companies were having understanding what was going on in their production applications or their production environment. So at that time, back in 2005, we built a product called Intercept Studio for monitoring application faults and performance. That product was ultimately bought by Microsoft in 2010 and integrated into Microsoft's System Center platform for production monitoring. Along with that product went our 2 founders, including Victor Mushkatin, who's on this call today, and you're going to hear from him today. Victor and his partner Alex went to Microsoft. Since that time, VIAcode has continued to build enterprise applications. Now they're all cloud architected. We've continued to work with Microsoft product teams, both the SQL team and the Azure product team, building features and functions into those products, which has given us a lot of insight into the product roadmaps. And once again, as part of our work with Microsoft and clients, we've recognized some unfulfilled needs in the market, and this has led us to build products for supporting Azure operations, such as our Azure native VIAcode incident management system, which you'll hear glimpses of about that today. Our CEO is Victor Mushkatin, who's on the call with me. Victor, you can say hello.
Hey guys.
There he is, good. That's a good sign he's here, good. Victor came back after 8 years at Microsoft, came back to VIAcode. But while he was Microsoft, Victor spent a fair amount of time as a group product manager, first for the SCOM product, and then he became a group product manager on the Azure product team for specifically working with application insights, which many of you may be familiar with and may be using today. So there's a lot of reasons why people move to Azure, like, for example, the expectation that they can reduce cost, or like the notion that they can make their IT more nimble and be more responsive to the business needs. And these are certainly possible to achieve, but it doesn't come from just moving workloads to Azure, as many of you have probably found out. So cloud can be complex and expensive. And when companies lack their people and experience and resources they need to optimize, which according to these stats happens often, right? 80% of security breaches are due to misconfiguration. Now, that would seem to be avoidable, right? 36% of cloud resources spend their time troubleshooting, which would imply that they are either inexperienced or do not have the tools or process to get the job done. and 40% of VMs are over provisioned. And that might explain why when we engage with most of our clients, they're trying to figure out why their Azure spend is running amok. So any of these problems sound familiar? I'm going to assume that you're all nodding your heads. Just about every company that comes to us has some idea of what their problem is, but they usually don't really have a strong sense for the extent of their problems. So the starting point for any company from our perspective is to assess the current state. The way we do that is by performing this Azure optimization assessment. And we actually have, and you're looking at it right now, we have a free, lightweight, nearly instantaneous self-service cloud assessment that you can use to perform yourself as a starting point. Victor's now showing us the output from a sample optimization assessment. And in this example, what you can see is a potential savings of $147,000 that could be achieved by implementing 6 recommendations that come out of this assessment. There's a secure score of 677, and you would have to implement 54 security recommendations that come out of the assessment to achieve a perfect score here of 1468. And we're showing you a cloud resources monitoring coverage of 6%, which you might think was selected to show you an extreme example, but this is not far from typical. Most companies actually have very little monitoring coverage, and Victor's going to talk a lot more about this. So what has changed between on-premise and cloud? Well, first, it used to be relatively easy to at least understand and predict IT costs because most people went through a capital request process to get everything. Now resources, AKA cost, can be bought with a click of a button, and anybody can do it. And the old process for managing spend and governance doesn't work well to help control those costs. Number 2, there are many additional security considerations that you may not be aware of in the cloud. And many of our clients and many companies think that when they move to the cloud, Microsoft's responsible for everything security. That's just not the case. Number 3, remember the good old days of on-premise when tools and data and alerts were abundant and it was easy to manage production or any other resources? Well, Azure is relatively new, and the tools for monitoring what's going on are still pretty limited and they're not integrated. So what can you do about that, right? We'll talk about that a little bit today. And then the last thing is that companies tend to lack the resources and the experience, and often the workloads for managing Azure operation is distributed or crowdsourced throughout the organization. That can mean that it's not clear who's responsible for doing certain tasks, that doing tasks can be a distraction or even an annoyance for the people that are responsible for that. And in all likelihood, there are holes in the plan that you have in place for figuring out what's going on in your Azure environment. So now that I've created this sense of anxiety for many of you, it's time for me to turn it over to Victor to begin to relieve or maybe increase that anxiety. Victor?
Thanks, Scott. And hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, where, as Scott mentioned, we will not provide you with in-depth answers to all those 4 challenges. We will provide you a kind of high-level overview. And then, based on your feedback, we plan to provide more webinars based on your feedback to cover interesting topics. Cloud is a journey, and what we see with many of our customers that shortly after they do lift and shift, and most do just lift and shift, they realize that they pay more than they expected. So we see that the cost is first concern that customers have in their cloud adoption story. Once they take cost under control, the very next questions is about security. As the surface that needs to be secured grows exponentially, and the tooling in the cloud and tooling on-prem slightly different, people have concerns. What are the best practices to secure a cloud environment? Once they cover cost and security, they realize that they need to deepen visibility into their cloud infra. And we see that mature companies, they want to get as much visibility into their cloud environment as they used to have in on-prem, and we'll cover some of the challenges in those areas during this talk. And the last but not least is a process. Cloud introduced a lot of advances with its elasticity, with ease of provisioning, and bringing everybody together. And with this kind of blessing comes the cost of more people involved in end-to-end process, and the need to have a common understanding of what's going on and be able to share that information amongst all the groups that participate in the supporting and development and management of the cloud. And we'll cover that as well. So if we'll look at the first big topic is cost. It is calculated that it is expected that in 2019 we wasted $14 billion. $14 billion has been spent on cloud resources that are not needed. The ease of provisioning introduced a new challenge of cloud IT or shadow IT and unnecessary spend that resulted in such a waste. And if you look at the biggest bucket of waste, what we see is that according to Park My Cloud, 44%, right scale rather, 44% of resources are non-production, which means that they're not used 56% of the time, and they idle. And while cloud resources are idle, you're still paying for them. That bucket represents approximately 8.8, almost $9 billion of cloud waste, followed by the over-provisioning, resource over-provisioning issue. And we see a lot of companies that when they move from the on-prem into the cloud, and they did lift and shift, they did it literally one-to-one. So if I had 16-core box on-prem, they created a 16-core in the cloud and utilize under 6% of that CPU. So that waste represents approximately $8.3 billion. In addition to those two big buckets, there are buckets that are not estimated at this point. For example, cloud introduced a very creative pricing. You can purchase, for example, service bus at $650 enterprise tier versus based on usage, or which is about $10 plus the usage. And you need to think which one would work for your particular scenario. Or you can get into this committed relationship with Azure, committing certain VMs loads, and that would lower your cost for your kind of consistent workloads. In addition to that, there's a kind of bucket of resources like orphaned resources. For example, you may have a VM that you deleted while you keep virtual disks and public IP addresses up. While you don't need them, you still pay for them. We've seen on the other extreme, the entire QA test environments were abandoned and no one knew in the big organizations who owns them. Sounds funny, but that's true. So those four big buckets represent a kind of high-level framework for you to use when you analyzing your key cloud waste offenders. What we found from our practice, helping customers to optimize their cloud, and on average, we help save up to 40% on the cloud bill. the first thing we help customers to analyze whether they can commit to a certain load for their VMs. And for example, if I take a D2 V3 with a 3-year commitment, it would be 30%, over 30% cheaper than pay-as-you-go option. But that's not that simple. As I mentioned, some of your resources are idle here, like your dev, QA environments. I did a quick math, and if, for example, you run those resources 10 hours a day, 20 days a month, it would be cheaper than a ride, than reserved instances. So it's not like a black and white answer, and you need to analyze your workloads and your parameters, and we can help you with that if you need some recommendations for that area. And the last bucket that is very interesting is the downgrading your cloud infrastructure while implementing out of scale. So while implementing, using cloud elasticity feature. If you just downsize by one your cloud infrastructure, it would save you 50%. Granted, it's one side doesn't fits all. So when we work with customers, we run some analytical tools, and we help customers to come up with a right infrastructure. Whether you are doing scale out and some legacy application does not support stateless, they're not stateless, so you need to manage state correctly or implement some kind of sticky IP, sticky sessions. In some cases, instead of going out, we see that it helps customers to go up within a tier instead of multiple instances, just create a bigger size of the same instance. So all these three strategies prove to help us save up to 40% to our customers on average. So once customers address their cost concerns, the very next theme that we hear from customers is security. Cloud infra grows exponentially, twice, doubles each year. If you think about growth in IoT devices, or like these days we all work from home, so the surface that needs to be secured is expanding exponentially, and that's what changed. And I did a quick math. I ran through most well-known security incidents in 2019, and I counted over 76 million personally identifiable records have been exposed. And these companies are not naive rookies. Those are some top high-tech companies, and they still do that wrong. So the point is that security, you're never done with security. It's a journey. And what you do with security these days, you extend defense in depth. Unlike prior approaches where you were defending your perimeter, these days you implement additional layers of security, starting from your physical security, physical network, physical hosts, all the way down to data governance and right management, what you see on the right picture. And the point that I want to make is that unlike your data center, where you are responsible for all those layers and improving each layer individually, where you might be improving your trapdoor for your data center. As you move to the cloud, Microsoft is taking some of those challenges, requirements on themselves. For example, you don't have to worry about physical security of Microsoft data centers. And as you can see, the more services you take from Microsoft, let's say moving from IaaS, where you're responsible for most of it, to PaaS, to SaaS, more and more layers of security are taken care of by Microsoft, but not all. And that's a very important point. Security is shared between Microsoft and you. For example, Microsoft has tooling to help you with the denial of service attack, but Microsoft will not block the attacker for you. And it's important to understand that. And what we recommend all of our customers is to implement Azure Security Center. It's a tool that Microsoft built based on extensive practice for running their own services and from MSIT. So it's essentially a collection of best practices that cover basically two major areas. One is it provides you with kind of proactive recommendations around best practices on how to tighten your security and improve your security posture. And also it provides you with monitoring and alerting for your security incidents. So when we work with customers implementing Security Center, we recommend to think about all these recommendations using this framework. First of all, each recommendations, while providing a value, can be analyzed by user impact, whether implementation of such recommendations affect users or won't affect users. And it needs to be analyzed whether that recommendation would incur additional cost or it's free. An example for here is, let's say, encryption at rest, meaning that information, when it's stored in cloud, should be encrypted. It's free. You can use database encryption, storage, VM disks, and that comes at no cost for you. While encryption in transit, meaning talking to from end users accessing your services or service-to-service communications, needs to be forced to communicate using HTTPS, right? So encrypted. That type of recommendation might affect your users. We've seen scenarios, as a matter of fact, I will show a similar demo a little bit later, where implementing such recommendations would break your applications. So what we help customers with, and what we recommend you to think about, is come up with a strategy how to implement those Security Center recommendations. And we usually start with no impact, no cost. Then we monitor for potential impact, and once we confirm that there won't be any impact, we typically help customers implement this no cost potential user impact, because customers usually like to start with no cost options first. And then we go into more advanced configuration of turning on additional data collections and other services for Microsoft. Once customers take care of their security and cost, we see a lot of mature customers want to go deeper into the cloud. And as I mentioned, as cloud grows exponentially, the amount of monitor telemetry is growing as well, skyrocketing. And your existing on-premise tooling might not be up to the task to provide you with actionable insights about your cloud environment. This means that in some cases you're running blind, like your cloud is kind of blurry. The result of that is you don't detect incidents in time, so your mean time to detect is going down to 2. Because you don't have information, the root cause analysis is taking a lot of time. So the analysts predict that enterprise organizations record about 1,200 incidents per month, with 5 critical incidents. Each cost about over $140,000. I did a quick math. It means that on average, corporation lose about $8.5 million a year. Microsoft invests a lot into improving incident monitoring and management stack for Azure, but it's a journey for Microsoft. And to highlight the point, I'm showing here, as you migrate from on-prem to the cloud, and you take 2 pretty well-known Microsoft monitoring platform, System Center for on-premise versus Azure Monitor in the cloud, I did a quick kind of comparison for you, where you see that Microsoft in on-premise was relying on, first of all, it was a mature product, and it was relying on ecosystem of third-party vendors and Microsoft internal product teams to develop management packs, essentially monitoring artifact that provides data collection, data visualization, and alerting for you. If you look at Azure right now, you have a lot of really cool insights, and I've been a GPM of Azure Application Insights, so that service is very dear to my heart. But the interesting gap that Microsoft has right now is that there's no out-of-the-box alerting. In other words, when Azure is feeling sick, it will record that resource is sick, but in some cases, it will not alert you. So what we recommend our customers, this is kind of do-it-yourself cheat sheet, to think about those 4 buckets of monitoring. First of all, you need to monitor for Azure itself and implement monitoring when Azure, for resource health, when Azure resources are not healthy, you need to be notified. As a result, typically you start investigating with Microsoft, you analyze whether that degradation will be for a long time, and you might want to implement ASR to a different site. Another bucket is capacity, and this is very important that you still need to monitor for capacity. Let's say you bought a SQL with a SQL plan with 250 DTUs. That's one of the capacity limits on a plan. If your application exceeded that capacity, it might run slow or being unresponsive. So from your perspective, it is more or less unavailable for your users. While from Microsoft perspective, it's perfectly fine and healthy because Microsoft adhered to its SLA, providing you with 250 DTUs. So it's very important to understand that it is still your responsibility to implement capacity monitoring. And like in the past, you were monitoring, you were relying on management packs for OS, for SQL, you need to do that yourself. And that's one of the area we help customers to go deep, to kind of expand that monitoring coverage that Scott was mentioning at the beginning of the talk. Another point is we recommend to monitor for performance. I'm sure that you've heard about, let's say, New Relics, AppDynamics. There are a lot of great tooling out there, as well as application insights that Microsoft put together specifically to address monitoring needs, cloud monitoring needs. The 4th bucket of monitoring is endpoint availability. Maybe some of you have used Keynote and Gomez in the past, pinged them. So again, Azure has a service called Application Insights Web Test that allow you to implement such endpoint availability testing to proactively notify whether that particular endpoint is up or down. And the last but not least is cost monitoring. And we've seen interesting implementation of such cost monitoring where people rely on kind of capacity or usage monitoring metrics to notify about cost overruns. We recommend you to study Azure cost and implement budgets and alerting. So once you take care of your cost constraint issues, security, and monitoring, the other big bucket is your process. And this number that there is a 30% revenue loss due to inefficient processes comes from study that covers both on-premise and cloud world. But what cloud brought is this agility. And unless you revisit your processes, this agility will only exacerbate this problem. And one of the issues that we see is that companies implement modern practices supporting their life cycle. Some, in addition to development and operations, some implement DevOps practices to automate releases into production. Some implement site reliability engineering, less known but widely used by giants like Google, Microsoft practice. And so you have all these group of people. They all use their beloved tools. For example, developers might be tracking their backlog in Jira, and DevOps might be using Terraform or Chef to deploy applications into productions, while SRE is using ServiceNow and, I don't know, Big Panda to manage alerts. And operations use Log Analytics or Grafana with Prometheus to monitor for their infrastructure. So all these people have their beloved tooling, yet they all need to talk about their life cycle. So what we see is a not the lack of great tooling or the lack of integrations available. We see the actual integrations in place in big organizations. So we believe that it is very important to be on the same page, and we see this being on the same page falls into those three big areas: visibility, accountability, and collaboration. First of all, if you have an on-prem, we recommend to implement a single pane of glass in Azure Monitor by integrating System Center with Azure Monitor. And as I mentioned, you need to spend some time, quality time, analyzing your monitoring coverage and improving. Once you have all the data, you need to improve accountability. We've seen in many companies where there's an alert here that nobody's looking in Azure Monitor, or there is a recommendations in Azure Advisor that would help you to improve your security, let's say. That's also not acted on. So one of the ways to solve that is to integrate that tooling into your existing ITSM process. And the last but not least, once you have everything integrated, you need to facilitate collaboration environment. And we see that establish that such collaboration environment inside teams have a lot of customers to speed up mean time to resolution, incident resolution time. Also, we notice that still development organization, its own beast, operating by its own schedule, sprint schedule from their own backlog. So it was beneficial for a number of our clients when they integrated production environment incidents directly to the developer's backlog. So when there is a need to escalate it to developers with one click of a button, there's a bug filed in developers queue, and they take that on as part of their daily stand-up. So we at VIAcode, we took an opinionated approach to this process, and we, for our own managed services, we implement a bunch of tooling to help deliver those. And I'm kind of showing you what we use under the cover. First of all, we've extended existing Microsoft integration with between System Center and Azure Monitor, and we actually published it on Azure Marketplace. So if you have System Center Ops Manager, we recommend to use our Alert Manager in addition to what Microsoft provides. Also, as I mentioned, Microsoft lack out-of-the-box reporting, and we ship, for example, Azure Data Factory monitoring that not only provide you with workbooks, some visualizations that help you analyze the data about ADF, but also it provides you with out-of-the-box alerting. that I'm going to show you. And then we've extended Azure Advisor and System Center Security Center recommendation engines with some of our recommendations. And we've integrated both reactive alerts and proactive recommendations into our own incident management system that then in turn we integrated into development backlog. So with one click of a button, you can delegate it to developers with collaboration inside teams. And we've invested a lot into automation for well-known failure modes, services failure modes. And we have extensive library of auto remediation library that help us to maintain and manage cloud resources at scale. So what I'm going to do here is just to show you a quick demo of that highlights, I would say, cloud problem, and what can you do about it, whether with our tooling or with your tooling, but it should give you an idea of a gap that needs to be taken care of. So what I have in my demo rig, I have 2 storage accounts, and I have Azure Data Factory that takes data from one storage account and copies that data to another storage account. And the series is the following. Imagine big enterprise organizations where I have a security operations team. And that security operations team decided to tighten security. And with zero trust mantra, they basically set up filtering around storages in this case. So they set up filtering around storage 2, and they broke ADF. So ADF no longer can access that storage. In the past, you wouldn't get notified about that, and I'll show you that. So what I will demonstrate you with VIAcode ADF, Azure Data Factory, you will get an alert that will be turned into an incident inside IMS, and then you will get a team notifications using VIAcode Intelligence Assistance in Teams, so you can start investigating that problem. And also, we've heard from a lot of customers, especially for enterprise customers, where there's a lot of groups, each changing with different permissions, each changing the infrastructure, that sometimes incidents are related to configuration change. As a matter of fact, we've heard that over 50% of production changes, and as Scott mentioned, production issues, and Scott mentioned earlier, 80% of security breaches are due to security misconfigurations. So we noticed that when we enrich our incidents, those alerts, with security changes, it helps significantly cut root cause analysis time. So let me quickly go to the demo. And what you see here is essentially my storage account. And I'm planning to switch from allow any network to deny. And essentially, I have this address range that I'm allowing. But the point is that no one can access this storage account. This is my destination table, and this is my Azure Data Factory. This is my Azure Data Factory runs, and as you see, it's right now it's running correctly. So let me see. Okay, so now as you see, it started failing. I will not wait until Azure creates an alerts, and alerts will get escalated to VIMS. I will switch to our channel inside VIMS, inside Teams, sorry. And this is the type of notifications that you would get. Essentially, there is some Azure Data Factory pipeline fail. So you can click on full information, and you would be able to dive in to this incident. And this is the incident inside our ticketing system. Technically, you could use any ticketing system, but currently we've integrated with our own ticketing system. And in addition to some alerting information, what I wanted to highlight is this change history. And if I go to this change history source group, what you will notice is I got transitioned to Azure DevOps, where I maintain the log of a history. And you see, since I've run this demo before this this call, you see that there was this change performed by me. And if I go into this change, I'd be able to see that I changed my allow to deny. So essentially, what I was able to do without even knowing that somebody changed something, when I got an alert, and I am SRE, right? So my security ops changed something I did not know. As an SRE, I received an incident. I was able to see what has been changed and actually by whom. We see from our experience that for big environments, that saves a lot of time on finger pointing. So going back, what we recommend you do is to establish baseline for cost, security, and monitoring depth in your Azure environments. And as Scott mentioned, we have the tooling for that. Second, we recommend integrate Azure monitoring with some type of incident management process. Third, we recommend to implement continuous review and improvement processes. And Microsoft has the tooling like Azure Advisor, Azure Security Center that help you do that. And the last recommendations is to invest into in your resources, skills of your employees, or bring external help, and establish accountability. So, Scott?
Oh, hey, Victor. Hey, thanks a lot, Victor. That was great. So I suspect it's not hard to see why Victor is considered an authority on Azure operations and is a sought-after resource by enterprise clients and Microsoft Field to solve difficult problems. As we mentioned at the beginning, it's not going to be possible for us to cover everything you would need to know to optimize your Azure environment just from listening to this webinar. That's why we plan to continue to do these webinars. So again, your feedback and ideas in the chat would be super helpful, in which areas you might want to see us either drill down to and further or cover on a separate webinar. Additionally, as you might have suspected, we can help you in a number of ways. So number one, if you were to look in the chat, and I'm going to do this right now, I should be sending to everybody right now a link. And we'll also email this link to you that'll allow you to initiate the free self-service, nearly instantaneous Azure optimization assessment that we mentioned earlier and that we generally suggest people use to get started with. Once you've done that assessment, engage us to help you get to the next level of detail on your Azure assessment. We'll be able to provide you specific actionable recommendations that can be used to help you begin to optimize your Azure environment. And then the third thing is talk to us about how we can help you manage your Azure operation. As you can see from this ROI calculator that's in front of you, it's not unusual for Azure managed services to pay for itself several times over in each year. For this client, which is a real client of ours, Azure managed services paid for itself 3 times over in the first year. So because of our experience and the tools that we're using, and likely you're focused on other priorities, in all likelihood, we're going to be able to manage your Azure operations more completely, more comprehensively, and more cost effectively than you're going to be able to do it yourself. So why do it yourself? So with that shameless commercial about VIAcode services, I want to thank you for attending. I do want to, before we leave today, I do want to see if we have some questions. I know there's at least one. We probably have a few minutes here. So Victor, if you want to pop back up your video, I'll ask you this one question. It says, can we monitor a site which requires authentication, a site which uses SSO? You're muted.
Okay, I'm not muted anymore. Yes, we can. I'm not quite sure what was that question, in what context it was, whether if the question is whether application and sites can do that. Yes, you can also use Selenium. So there are a variety of techniques to do that.
Okay. And Victor, here's another question for you. If we're currently doing monitoring using System Center on premise, can we just simply move that to Azure?
Yes and no. As a matter of fact, we help
That might be a whole other webinar, Victor.
Yes, that's a whole another webinar. We worked with MSIT, helping them transition to the cloud, and they did exactly that. So the first step was to move entire management group up into the cloud, as they were moving VMs up into the cloud into IIS, and we essentially almost replicated our management stack, cloud on-premise management stack in the cloud, and then we went into the process of essentially peeling each MP one by one and transitioning them into Azure Monitor, ultimately shutting down that management group in the cloud. Okay. We have actually on Azure Marketplace, we have an offer with a really, I think, a really good kind of process description how we do it and how we've done it from SIT.
Okay, great, thanks, Victor. And for those of you, I didn't mention this earlier, but for those of you that are still migrating workloads to Azure, we can certainly kind of help you with that, both get those workloads into Azure and to help you optimize them. In some cases, that means modifying applications. But so I think that might be all we have time for today. We're coming up on 10 minutes to the hour. I hope this was a good use of your time. Hopefully, we've provoked you to assess what's going on in your Azure operation, to expose issues that you may not be aware of. And then it prompts you to further investigate how to kind of address and resolve these issues. Ideally, you're clear on what you can do next with or without our help. Azure Optimization Assessment, the link is in the chat. Feel free to reach out to us to engage us. We're happy to have initial conversations with you to help understand kind of where you are in your cloud journey, what challenges you're facing, and how we can help, even if it doesn't lead to us working together. So with that, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
enjoy.